I want my life to be shaped by the decisions that I make, not by the decisions that I don't make or that somebody else makes for me. 100 years from now, Julian, nobody's going to remember you and I were here. But what I hope people remember are the relationships, the connections that I've made with other human beings. That's really all I care about at this point in my life. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is going to truly live.
The knowing that you're going to die changes the way you live.
You don't have to listen to your brain. You can keep moving forward. God never said we were supposed to be happy, but the word joy or joyful appears 420 times in the Bible. Life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. When somebody's emotional, you're not trying to develop or come up with solutions. You're just letting them burn off a lot of that emotional energy. Fear is one of the biggest things that holds us back from doing everything in our lives. Success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for other people.
This is the Doubtless Podcast, here to help you change from a state of doubt and insecurity towards a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. I'm your host, coach and psychologist Julian, and my guests are remarkable, ambitious humans who share their stories of doubtful moments, of their insecurities, and how that shaped their successes today. Terry, I'm very excited that we get to speak today. I saw in your profile or in your description, you have been in so many places. You've been a hostage negotiator. You have been a cancer warrior, as you describe it really nicely. You have been a basketball coach and played yourself. And there's so many other avenues and important parts in this that I would love to dive into. And now I think you have so much wisdom in the experiences that you have made, and you bring that across in around your 6, or as we just spoke, almost 700 podcast interviews. So I'm really excited to dig into that and see where we will go today. So thank you first of all for joining, for coming here.
Well, Julian, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, and you have like a really interesting tagline on your website, and I love that. Your tagline describes it similar to inspiring people to lead uncommon lives. And that's intriguing to me. Uncommon lives. What exactly is an uncommon life for you, and why is that important to live one?
I think we're all destined, if we want, to live uncommon lives. And there's an entrepreneur here in the United States by the name of Ed Milet. And he talks about the 4 types of people in the world. And, when I first heard it, I'm like, well, is this really true? Well, let me give you the 4 types real quick. The first type, he says, are the unmotivated. And he said that's the vast majority of people you will run into in your life. The second group he talks about are the motivated, where it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. Mm-hmm. He says it's kind of low level, but it works for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life. The third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from 2 words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And I've always, in my life, tried to get to the point where I was an aspirational person, where I was aspiring people. People wanted to be like you, not for the sake of being like you, but because you had certain qualities and traits that they admired and they wanted to emulate. So I think we're all destined to be aspirational people, but I've seen so many people that just kind of muddle through their lives. They have no direction, they have no motivation, they have no discipline, and that's never been me. And so I guess I want to bring people along with me to have the best life they can possibly have, not to just kind of muddle through their lives.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And also why you wrote the book, Sustainable Excellence. You're not trying to just get by and, drive and sort of glides through life, but actually making sure that you go to the highest potential that you have and really dive into all the difficulties and challenges that you might have. And so one thing, at least for me, sounds so interesting and intriguing, where I want to dive into, is the part of your former job as a hostage negotiator. First of all, I'm a psychologist, so from my perspective, this is highly intriguing and so interesting what it does to you when you are in such a situation and negotiate with the person who holds the hostages. And so I would love to know, what was one of the most memorable experiences that you've had as a hostage negotiator?
Actually, I'll give you two. One's kind of a short story, if you don't mind. And what I'm going to tell you now is very atypical. Did not happen like this. As a matter of fact, I don't ever recall it happening like this. And let me just sort of set the stage. What we used to talk about, what we did, how we did it, was when we were all younger, we would go to the park and play on the teeter-totter or the seesaw as kids. And that's kind of what we were doing, not playing, but if you think about the person we were negotiating with, when we started, usually their emotional brain was way up in the air and their rational brain was way down on the ground. And so when somebody's emotional, you're not trying to develop or come up with solutions. You're just letting them burn off a lot of that emotional energy. And then over time, as you ask questions, you gain trust and things like that. Eventually, you get to the point where their rational brain is up in the air and their emotional brain is down on the ground. And that's the time when you can talk about putting the gun down, letting the hostages go, coming out peacefully and things like that. So understanding that, this first story, this was an individual, we were not a full-time SWAT team. So, and I'm going to date myself now, we carried pagers at the time. And so when the pager went off, we would go to the location that was on the pager. Well, I was working that night, so I was in uniform in a marked car, and I got there fairly quickly. And I was the first negotiator there. And I talked to the uniform guys, and I'm like, what's the deal? It's like, he's drunk, he's got a gun, he's taken his wife hostage and barricaded himself in the house. I said, okay. I said, do you have him on the phone? He said, yes, we do. I said, well, let me talk to him. So we started a conversation. After about 10 minutes, I just had a feeling. And like I said, I explained, it was hours before we talked solution-based issues, but I had a feeling. I just had a gut feeling. I said, what would it take for you to come out? And Julian, there was this long pause, and he said, give me a beer. And I was like, I said to him, if I gave you a beer, do I have your word you would come out? He said, do I have your word I could drink it? I said, you absolutely have my word you could drink the beer, but do I have your word you will let your wife go and you'll come out? He said, yeah. So I gave $5 to the uniform guys. I said, go down to the store, buy a beer. The tactical team put it on the front porch, and I called them back. And I said, your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until your wife comes out and you come out with your hands up, no gun. And he hit me again with, do I have your word that I can drink the beer? I said, you absolutely have my word you can drink the beer. All of a sudden, the front door comes flying open, and here comes his wife, and here he comes. We handcuff him, let him drink his beer, and off to jail he went. So a very atypical negotiation. This next story was, I'm going to say it was more typical, but they're all, as you can imagine, unique. So this was an individual that wanted to commit suicide. And this started probably around dinner time. And so he slit his wrist. And that didn't work. And then he had the brilliant idea that somehow turning the gas on in his oven and sticking his head in the oven would somehow kill him. Well, that didn't work either. So he called a family member, and the family member called us. And so it's probably 2-3 o'clock in the morning now, and he's got a gun. And we had been talking, and he finally got to a point where he said, I'm really tired. I just want to come out. And I said, yeah, do that. Put the gun down, come out. I said, I'll come down to the scene. We'll talk man to man. We'll talk face to face. And he said, I'd really like that. I said, put the gun down, but take the phone with you. And I told him what was going to happen when he got outside. But he hung up the phone, which is not uncommon. We're conditioned to hang up the phone when a conversation is over. And about 30 seconds later, one of the tactical officers came on the radio and said, I heard a gunshot. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. You shot yourself. He did. Shot himself in the head. But he shot himself at such an angle, and I get the feeling it was kind of a hesitation, like I really don't want to do this, but boom. The bullet went in right underneath his skin on his temple, traveled around his skull, and came out the other side. Never penetrated his skull, never got to his brain. And he was just lucky. It was just the angle at which he had shot himself. It wasn't like this. It was more of a hesitation. So an incredibly bloody wound, but not a very serious wound.
Oh, wow. And
I think he was an example of a guy who, we always talk about when it's your time, it's your time. But the opposite of that is true as well. When it's not your time, it doesn't matter what you do. 3 times he tried to kill himself. 3 times God said, no, not your time now. You stay down there.
Wow. That is such a fascinating story. And indeed, as you just said, sometimes it's just not the right moment, but it's so surprising that even though you have the intent to maybe even kill yourself, and sounds like you seriously tried, even with a gun, that there are instances where it does not happen. So that's interesting. But that also leads me then to the part of what this podcast is about, and the huge part is I was also intrigued then knowing when you go into those situations and you are called to a place with your pager, hey, is there a moment when doubt creeps in, when you feel like, oh my God, I can't handle this, or this is a situation that feels so out of my comfort zone that you feel overwhelmed? Was that ever a situation in either your education as a negotiator or later in one of those situations?
Oh, absolutely. And mostly at the beginning, when I got on the team, we practiced by doing scenarios. We would role play and things like that. And we had a psychologist that was attached to our team, and he would always be at our training. And a lot of times he would develop the scenarios and things like that. And where we learned was in the debrief after the scenario. It would be like, did you ever think this person might have been schizophrenic and off their medication? Or, oh no, I never thought about that. And so, it was a lot of, and the newspaper at the time, social media was filled with these different kind of scenarios. So it was very easy to do that. But I'll show you what kind of a knucklehead I kind of was when I first started. Very simple. It was my turn. I was up. There was a hostage and a hostage taker behind a locked door. That was it. And I was trying to negotiate. Julian, I spent probably 80% of that negotiation talking to the hostage. And when it was over, they were like, you understand, we're trying to get the hostage taker to let the hostage go. So you probably ought to talk more to the hostage taker. And I was like, yeah, I guess I got a lot to learn here. I thought I was going to just come in and, and jump right in. But the reason that it wasn't as doubtful when we did these things is we didn't do these by ourselves. So there was a primary. There was somebody that was talking to the person on the phone or however we had that set up. And then there was a secondary that was sitting right next to you, listening to everything that was being said, and sometimes passing you notes. And then there was 3 or 4 people kind of out in the crowd. Because, Julian, there were a lot of times we would get on scene, we would have no idea why we were there. What happened? How did this happen? What precipitated this individual to take a hostage or to barricade him or herself? Mostly they were hims. They were males. So we had no idea. So you're starting from scratch. You have no idea. So you may get a note from your secondary that says, don't talk about his mother. Because the people working the crowd, getting the intelligence, found out that he'd had a huge fight with his mother, and he got so mad that he grabbed a gun and he barricaded himself in his house. It's like, okay, that's good information to know. So we didn't do this in a vacuum. It wasn't just like, well, figure it out as you go. There was a little bit more nuance to it of, what information do I have? What information am I going to use now? What information am I going to hold until maybe a later point in time and things like that. So it wasn't as scary just because we really weren't, quote unquote, by ourselves doing this.
Okay, that's very interesting, right? Because quite often when I talk to people about doubt or their insecurities, what comes up is that they ruminate so much with themselves and by themselves that they just can't get out of that loop, out of that pattern almost. And now I find it interesting that you say, especially also with the hostage negotiation, is that you're not alone actually with it. You have your secondary, you have the psychologist that's like after the scene is talking to you, you have other people around you that support you in that to help you not making mistakes, to help you to recover the information that might have been lost. Like all of these things, which is, I think, very interesting. But from that, did you take some lessons from being a hostage negotiator to your life? Did something from that apply, or did you take something from those lessons that you've learned there into your day-to-day life?
I did. And it was interesting when I first started. One of the other things that I got was a formula about how we, and when I say we, I'm talking about human beings, not necessarily police and bad guys and that kind of stuff, but we as human beings communicate with each other. And I remember that formula was 7-38-55. So we were taught that 7% of how we communicate a message with another person are the words that we use. And think how many times in your life you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I would have said that differently. That's only 7% of how that message gets communicated. 38% is the tone of voice that you use with that message. Are you yelling and screaming? Are you calm? Are you really low pitched? Are you curious? So 38% is the tone of voice. And then more than half, 55% of how any message is communicated is your body language and your facial expressions. So understanding that formula, when we were negotiating, if somebody was barricaded in a room with a gun, had hostages, or was just barricaded, I was not in the room with that person. That wouldn't have been safe. So I was a lot of times down the street or on the other side of a locked door or whatever it ended up being. So we didn't have the luxury of that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying, hey, Julian, XYZ, and see you kind of roll your eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that to me. So we had to get good at figuring things out, certainly by what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it.
Yes.
So, and really the overarching point of all this, think about any relationship you have in your life, whether it's with your parents, your significant other, your children, your friends. The overarching theme is trust. If you don't trust your parents or they don't trust you, if you don't trust your spouse and they don't trust you, it's not a very good relationship. So we're trying to build trust with an individual that, one, is probably having the worst day of their life. I mean, if your house is surrounded by the police and you're talking to me, it's not a good day. And two, is in probably some kind of a major crisis in their life. So trust was incredibly important. And we're trying to build that with this individual that we've never met before in our lives. So there were a lot of times we would spend hours talking about something over here when the real problem was over here and they didn't trust us enough. We hadn't banked enough trust with them for them to really tell us what was going on.
That's fascinating. So not only does it help you, or first of all, to understand communication to a way deeper level, But I can also imagine, at least that what happens to me when I do sessions, just coaching sessions, just one-on-one on the phone, so without video. And what is happening then is you get so acutely aware of pauses, of the way they speak, if even the throat is constricted, they have difficulty saying that, they feel sad when they said it, even though they didn't even really notice it. And so I presume that is also maybe happening to you when you're just talking to them on the phone. And I think that is just such an interesting thing that happens when we get like essentially stripped away with some important information or some sensory input, that we get hyper focused on a special few. And I want to make this actually a short transition towards one of your quotes that you have on or had recently on your website. I think it was just this Saturday, the 17th of August, which was from Christine Evangelou. I don't know if you remember that one, but it really stuck with me when I saw it. It says, "A crowded mind leaves no space for a peaceful heart." And why that is a good transition is because I think, and that's my, let's say, hypothesis, that we've spent so much time on our mind and our thoughts and trying to think logically, that this idea or this part of the heart, the emotional side, the sort of spirit, sometimes is not that prominent or not that there. So is it something that gets triggered when I read that quote back to you?
Yeah, it is. You know, if you think about it, thoughts just come to us. They flow through our brains. The Cleveland Clinic, a fairly major medical group here in the United States, has done a lot of brain research, and I've heard all kinds of numbers, but I'm just going to use theirs for sake of simplicity. They estimate that we have, human beings, 50 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our minds every day. Thoughts in and of themselves are not an issue, are not a problem. Thinking about those thoughts becomes the problem, where we start to, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not good for me, or what should I do that? And that's where we get our mind cluttered. There's a book called Do Hard Things. It's written by a man by the name of Steve Magnus. And Magnus was the track and field coach at the University of Minnesota, a fairly large university here in the United States. And in that book, he talks about a study, I believe it's called the Thinking Study, where people at the University of Minnesota took undergraduates, co-eds, guys, all that kind of stuff, and basically put them in a room with nothing in the room. No devices, no cell phones, no earbuds, no pens even. The only thing in the room was a table and a chair. And they asked them to sit in that room for, I don't know, I think it was anywhere from 6 to 18 minutes. So it's not like you're going to be there for days or anything like that. The only other thing in the room was a buzzer. And if you pressed the buzzer, you received an electric shock. 68% of the men and 25% of the women shocked themselves, including one guy who shocked himself on average every 5 seconds. And the conclusion of the study is, we're not comfortable in our own skin. We're not comfortable with our own thoughts. And I don't think I fall into that category. But when I read that study, I was like, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes every day just unplugged, with nothing, just sitting in a chair alone by myself, not meditating, not praying, not doing anything, and letting my thoughts go wherever they may. And I think what that study showed us is so many young people are so in their head. There's so much stuff going on in their head that they can't possibly have a peaceful heart, because that doesn't even enter the equation, because I got so much anxiety and tension going on in my brain. I can't possibly have a peaceful heart.
And what also, I remember that study, and I think also an important part is that they asked beforehand the participants, hey, do you want to get an electric shock? And, they just all tested and tried. It's like, oh my God, that's painful. I don't want to feel that again. And then they sit in that room and the thoughts become so terrifying or so boring or whatever their feeling was. It's like, that electric shock doesn't seem that bad anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me and you, it probably didn't make a lot of sense. I'm like, really? I mean, it's not like you're there for days. It's just, I mean, even if it's 20 minutes, even if it's I'd love a half hour where I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to talk to anybody. This would be great, peace and quiet, but for younger people, I think that get their acknowledgement, get, their identity from what people say to them on these devices. It's a scary thing not to have that. And they don't like what's going on in their own mind, because I don't think they spend any time just being alone with their own thoughts. Being comfortable with who you are as a human being. It's hard to interact with somebody else if you're not comfortable with yourself.
Yeah. And how's your connection or relationship right now with social media or the internet? How would you describe your way of using those medias?
I mean, I use them to get a message out. In all honesty, I have a website where people can leave me messages and things like that, and I respond to all those messages. But I don't take my identity from those mediums and things like that. I remember back when I was a police officer, there were people on the force who had been police officers for 30, 35, 40, 45 years, should have retired decades ago, but their identity was so tied up in the gun, the badge, and the authority that they had that they felt they were nothing without those things, and so they kept working. And they weren't effective. They were way past being effective and that. But people, they just kind of put them off into the corner in some menial job, but they still had the badge, the gun, and their identity. And it was like, I don't want my identity to come from some external force. I want my life, I guess, to be shaped by the decisions that I make, not by the decisions that I don't make or that somebody else makes for me.
And so what do you see now when it sounds like quite a sort of detached and just as a useful tool that you see all these media outlets. How would you describe now what you saw over the last 10, 15 years that was happening to especially the younger generation? What change do you see?
I see less of a connection, with each other. I still have tumors in my lungs because of my cancer journey. And so I'm treated at the hospital every 3 weeks. And one of the nurses that cares for me is a former hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know what hospice is, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. It's end of life care. And she gave me a book to read. And that book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And I learned a lot of great things from the book. But one of the major things I learned from it was no matter who the person having the near-death experience saw during that experience, whether it was Jesus or a saint or an angel or a friend or a relative, whoever it was, almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody got asked one question. How do you treat my people? In other words, how do you treat each other? How do we care for each other? What connections are we making with other people? And there's a psychologist here in the United States at the University of Chicago who does an experiment with his students every year, and he does it himself. The experiment is, I want you to go out and get on a bus, and I want you to meet somebody, and in 3 questions, have a deep conversation with them. So question number 1, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going fine. Question number 2, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And I'm just making this up. Oh, I'm a doctor. Question number 3, have you always wanted to be a doctor? Either, yeah, I'm following my dad's footsteps, I really want to do that, or no, I wanted to be a vet and, whatever, something got messed up or something. So now you're having a deep conversation. And I think social media is preventing us from doing that. Life on social media is on the surface. We don't go deep with people. And if you can have a deep conversation in 3 questions, why shouldn't we? I mean, 100 years from now, Julian, nobody's going to remember you and I were here. But what I hope people remember are the relationships, the connections that I've made with other human beings. That's really all I care about at this point in my life.
That's wonderful. I love that little example as well with those 3 questions, because I mean, we're doing this because we want to have a deep conversation here, but if you put it in numbers, it's so easy. Just ask 3 questions. 3 questions is all it needs for you to build a connection, a deeper thing than you probably have with most people on social media. So that example was really nice. So in case you're listening now, this is a great. I'm gonna do that. I live now in a new place where I haven't connected with a lot of people yet. So I'm gonna do that. Ask those 3 questions just to get a deeper understanding. And I also saw another quote on the website. By the way, your website is great with all those inputs and quotes that are happening. So I took another one, which was from Sydney Banks. And for those who don't know him, he's the founder of the 3 principles of the sort of a way of thinking around thoughts, the universe, and how we're creating our reality. And the quote just described was that if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experiences, that alone would change the world. What does that bring up in you?
Then I think we live small. Life is supposed to be about making mistakes, doing things that are embarrassing, trying new things that maybe you like, maybe you don't like. And I wish I could remember where I heard this, but I've seen so much, and I've done this in my life, absolutely. Where we set these sort of arbitrary goalposts or mile markers where, okay, by the time I'm 28 years old, I want to be making $100,000 a year. And by the time I'm 32 years old, I want to be married and have at least 1 child. And they're just arbitrary. We just throw a number out there. But then when we were 29 years old and we're not making $100,000 a year, or we're 35 years old and we're not in a relationship and don't have any prospects for a relationship, all of a sudden things are bad. Things aren't going right. My life isn't on track. But they're based on arbitrary goals that we set up. That's just it's just a number is all it is. And this person said that instead of doing that, instead of taking these sort of mile markers and just putting them out there at some arbitrary time, he said, look at your life in terms of decades. So he said, in your 20s, do everything. Anything at all that interests you, do it. Try it. Make mistakes, screw up, do all kinds of stuff that, I don't know. I've never been to a chamber music concert. Let me go to that and see it. I like it. I didn't like it. Whatever. Just do anything that has an appeal to you at all. And then in your 30s, kind of dig into 2 or 3 things that really spark your interest, for lack of a better term. And then he says in your 40s, when you have more experience, you're more mature, your prefrontal cortex has wired itself and all that, then find that one thing and really give your life to it. And then he says in your 50s and your 60s, you can reap the benefits of what you did in your 20s, your 30s, and your 40s. And I like that because there is no arbitrary thing. It's like you got a decade. Just go mess up, go have fun, go do whatever in your 20s. And then when you do that, more than likely, and I think this has been true in my life, some things start to crystallize. And it's like, okay, this is important, this is important, this is important. I want to spend my time on these things. Maybe it's family, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's a certain kind of work. And then in your 40s, it's like, man, I'm going full bore on all this. So I just like looking at life from that perspective as opposed to those arbitrary mile markers that we just set along our life.
Yeah. And what is one or two of those experiences that you've had, or the thing that you now look back at your 20s or 30s, that you were like, this I can reap now. This you can get the fruits of this from the 20s and the 30s. What were one or two of those things that you see now?
I think the biggest thing that happened to me when I graduated from college, and again, I'm going to date myself a little bit. This was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. I moved home after college to find a job. And I did. I found that job in the corporate headquarters of a fast food company in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. And so, as horrible as that was, my dad died at 54 with end-stage breast cancer. My grandmother, died at 80. So, I mean, that wasn't as bad, but they died within about 18 months of each other. So it was just a horrible 3.5 years. And here I am, a recent college graduate, the first person in my family to graduate from college. I'm going to make my mark on the world. And it's like, it's like stepping on the brake. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to do this. I'm sleeping in the same bed I slept in when I was in high school and things, and it was like, it was horrible, but at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to sit quietly with my dad and have some really deep conversations about life and what you should do with your life. And there is a reason that you're here and you need to find that reason and things like that. And I didn't realize it at the time, in all honesty. I mean, those kind of things didn't crystallize with me. I was just kind of, it was like, wash, rinse, repeat was kind of thing. I mean, every morning I would get up, I would empty my father's urinal, I would take a shower, I would eat breakfast, I would go to work. And then at lunchtime, I'd come home and help my mom get my father ready for work, put him in my car, drive him to his office, get him in his office, then drive to my office. And then at 5 o'clock, I would reverse that. I'd go get him, bring him home, get him undressed, put him in bed. And that was my life for 3.5 years. I mean, I had really no relationships. I wasn't hanging out with my buddies. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. And don't get me wrong, I would do that again. I would do it for 30 years if that's what it took. My parents gave my brothers and I a wonderful life, a tremendous life. Very grateful for what they did for us. So it was my time now. It was my turn to kind of return that favor of, you need me. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm going to be here for you and our family.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting. What did you take out of that time and maybe that specific memory that you have?
I remember my dad and I talking a lot about purpose. My dad had end-stage breast cancer, which back in the 1980s, they really didn't know how to treat a man with breast cancer. And they pretty much told him to go home and die. And he lived another 3.5 years. And I believe he did because he had a purpose. His purpose, I think, was real estate. He loved, his family was number one, but he loved real estate. And he actually worked up till 2 weeks before he died. And I sort of tucked that in the back of my mind and said, well, when it's my time in the barrel, so to speak, I need to have that purpose. And, I've spent my entire life doing physical things. I was a college basketball player. I was a police officer on the SWAT team. And now I'm in a wheelchair. I don't have a left leg. It's been amputated. And, you kind of are balancing when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important. I mean, was it important that I played basketball? Not really. No, nobody really cared about that. But I think the things that I'm doing now, the relationships that I'm cultivating, the writing that I'm doing, the podcasting that I'm doing, those things are things that I just feel in my heart I'm supposed to be doing. And so the point of purpose, the point of having something that is bigger than yourself, of finding meaning in your misery, so to speak, is really, I think, one of the biggest things I took away from that with my dad. And if you don't have that purpose, you sit around and feel sorry for yourself, and my life is terrible and I'm in pain and everything's bad. But you can kind of move away from that or move forward in that if you have some kind of purpose in your life.
Yeah, and how did you first notice this kind of purpose for you, and how does it feel for you to have purpose? What's the indicator that you are in your purpose right now?
I guess let me answer the last part of that question first. Energy. I mean, I spend an entire week at the hospital every 3 weeks. I'm giving a medication. I have a terrible reaction to the medication. It beats me up. It just wears me out. But writing or podcast, being a guest on podcasts and things like that, it gives me energy. It gives me that purpose. Finds that energy comes to the surface for me, and I can use it. And my wife and I will occasionally have disagreements about, she's like, your blood counts are low, you need to rest. And I do joke with her. I say this all the time, like, I'll get plenty of rest when I'm dead. This gives me purpose. This gives me energy. It really does. When you're doing what you're supposed to do, I don't know how to describe it. There's a radiance. There's something that comes forth from you that's like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And by doing that, I think it provides you with energy. So it's kind of a sort of a revolving, you've got purpose, you get energy. You have energy, you get purpose. And so you're able to kind of make that circle that just allows you to live your life. I mean, when I was diagnosed, I was told I'd be dead in 2 years. That was 12 years ago. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to do until God decides I'm done doing it.
And what is your current situation with the cancer and how are you dealing with that at the moment?
Well, so as I mentioned, I don't have a leg. I had my foot amputated initially. My cancer presented on the bottom of my foot. Initially had my foot amputated, and then right in the middle of the COVID pandemic had my leg amputated, and also found out I had tumors in my lungs. And so I am on a clinical trial drug now that does nothing to the cancer per se. It's not a chemotherapy type of drug where it attacks the tumors, but what it does is the way cancer proliferates in the body is it secretes an enzyme or a protein that hides itself from your own immune system. And what this new drug is designed to do is go in and wipe out that protein or that enzyme so that my own immune system, just like when you have a cold or a flu virus, your immune system says, hey, this doesn't belong here, we need to attack it. It's my immune system that's keeping these tumors in check. So I will, in November, it will be 4 years that I'm on this clinical trial drug. I'm the only person in the world still on it. It's working for me. There are other people, around the world on it, but there are also other people where I'm treated. I'm in Colorado, in the U.S., at the University of Colorado hospitals that were also on it. That didn't work for them. They've unfortunately passed away. The drug is being fast-tracked for cervical cancer in women, so it's being used for that. But for melanoma, which is what I have in this rare form of melanoma, it's working for me. And so now the whole thing is, why is it working for you? So they're trying to figure out what about you makes it work, whereas the other people, even in the study at our hospital, it didn't work for. So it's sort of a study within a study at this point in time.
And the way you talk about this right now gives at least this sort of energy that you seem surprisingly content or okay. You even joke about this of like you haven't get plenty of rest when you're dead. How is it? Like, how do you see this situation right now and you having cancer?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you accept your mortality, I enjoy reading Stoic philosophy. You know, the Stoics used to talk about memento mori. You know, remember death. Remember that you're going to die. We don't we don't subscribe to that in the West. I don't think. You know, it's kind of like death. Nope, we don't talk about that. It's something that's down the road. When I had when I found out, you know, I had these tumors in my lungs and I had my leg amputated, I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, and to the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I do these podcasts and I give talks to groups and stuff like that about motivation and the need to keep moving forward, I actually got some brushback from people that were like, you know, don't you think planning your funeral is kind of defeatist? And I had to remind these folks that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is going to truly live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. Julian, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm, you know, trying to do at this point. So, you know what, like I said, in 2012, I was told I'd be dead in 2 years. It's 2024 now, and I'm still here. So I don't worry so much about the dying part. I mean, when I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. Spend much more time thinking about and worry, not necessarily worrying, but trying to live the best life I can live. And I've always said, I've probably done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've done in my entire life. And I had a pretty good life, done a lot of things prior to getting cancer.
Wow, that proverb just gave me some shivers the way you were saying it, because it is so true that that we spend so much time worrying about the future and worrying about the difficulties that might come, or worry about how we perceived by others. But when you put the focus on what you need to do in order to fully live, that's what you're doing now the past 10 years, really focusing on what gives you this energy, what sparks this motivation for you, then it almost flips. It flips to you have the opportunity, possibility to actually impact people, because the energy that you bring also now in this podcast is, and I was watching so many other podcasts, and you have every single one of them, you had this energy and you were putting it out there, and you have this motivation to really inspire, bring people into spirit with the way you speak. And that is, I think, such a great reminder to see and focus on the parts that bring you energy rather than focus on the ones that might be in the future interfering you. Because that's what, I guess, now with coming briefly back to the topic of social media, what's happening when we're constantly in the mind and constantly thinking about what in the future might be tough, what might be difficult, or have those markers and we don't meet those markers. All of that is happening in the mind and the thoughts, but it's not happening in what you describe now, being truly in spirit, being truly in the moment and noticing what gives you energy. So for that, first of all, thank you that you bring all that energy all the time, but also that insight of focusing on, hey, death is going to be there eventually, so how are you going to live? And some people even describe it in a way that it's not that life and death are necessarily separate, but with every day that you are alive, you're dying a little bit, and parts of you are dying constantly that you don't come back to, and you become a different person. and cells of your body are dying constantly. So there's this interesting idea that I think especially we have in the West, that the idea of there's life and there's death. And it's absolutes. Either you're alive or you're dead. But it's not like a moving part, not a symbiosis or anything like that. It's just either or, black and white. And I think that what you just shared about the knowing that you're going to die changes the way you live, which is also quite interesting, right? And so what I think I want to bring this to now as well is when you have maybe those moments that you are down or you are in doubt or you have some worries, I presume you have them at times, how do you get back on feeling this inspiration, feeling, hey, but there's something out there in your purpose that needs to be done? How do you get back to that?
Well, first, thanks for saying that, because I don't want your audience to think, I mean, you're looking at me now, there's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I do get down. I feel sorry for myself. I cry. I do all that, especially with the medication. It just beats me down. It makes your emotions raw and at the surface and that. So how do I get through that? Two stories. One is, so there was a professor, this true story happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University here in the United States, where this professor did an experiment with rats. And you may have heard about this, where he put rats in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. The average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he put the exact same rats back in that exact same tank of water. And on average, those rats treaded water the second time for 60 hours. Now think about that. I mean, first time 15 minutes, it's not like your business is going to fail or your marriage is going to fail or you're going to flunk a test or anything like that. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but more than likely, and nothing's 100%, there's a very good chance that we'll get to where we want to be if we continue to move forward. And the second thing it taught me was just basically how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. We quit, we give up, we give in long before we need to, because our brains are telling us, hey, this hurts, this is uncomfortable, I don't like this, stop it. And we stop, we give up. Now, don't get me wrong, I think everybody has a breaking point, but I think that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever thought, the way we thought it would be, to be honest with you. And so, we get to a point, and I try to use the example of a marathon runner. Marathon runners talk about hitting that wall at some point in time during the race where I can't go on, this hurts, it's uncomfortable, my brain's telling me to stop. But they also talk about if they can keep moving forward, they sort of break through that wall and get that second energy to be able to finish the race. So think about that. Think about your life in terms of that. That you're absolutely positively, you can break through that. You don't have to listen to your brain. You can keep moving forward. And the second story is, oh my gosh, Julian, it just went right out of my head. This is what happens when you get old.
Oh no! Then we'll just keep going a little bit, and if it comes back,
okay,
just
sure. Yeah, I'm
just
sorry.
jump it back.
I was like, it was right there, and then it just like went away. Sorry about that.
If you wouldn't have announced it, nobody would have missed it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, just come back to whenever you get the inspiration back. Okay, but I think that's such an interesting first off point to understand the power of your mind and how much you can push through. And recently, I've been to a retreat of Shaolin monks, meaning they I guess their main thing is going through still Buddhism and going through suffering through physical exhaustion and challenges. So one common one is, for example, standing in a horse stance. So basically in a bit wider squat position for like half an hour, 45 minutes. And you break in usually after 30 seconds or a minute if you go down. And I was there at that camp, and that was such a difficult exercise. I did not expect, because there were grannies, there were a lot of other people, and everybody had to do those exercises. And I was so surprised. I'm doing this exercise with the horse stances, because it is such a great tool to overcome my mind when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm anxious, or when anything that feels I can't handle. I'll do this exercise. I set the mark for 2 minutes. By now I can reach 2 minutes, maybe sometimes a bit more, and I'll just do it. And then at minute 10, minute 20, I struggle. My mind is like, you can't hold this anymore. This is way too much. You should stop now. It's fine. You don't need to go 2 minutes. You already achieved whatever you wanted to do. And not until I'm like at 150, I actually get to that point where my body relaxes, I give in, and I'm fully like in this acceptance of this pain right now. And that's actually only then is when I reap the benefits. Only then is when my brain relaxes, my body fully comes back, and I'm present. I'm really present after that exercise. And so that is like, again, I guess a little exercise that instead of putting yourself into water and hoping somebody pulls you out, this might be actually a practical tip that somebody can do when they feel overwhelmed, when they feel in a tough spot, to understand it. First of all, it's the mind. You can push it way further, and this exercise actually brings you back into the present moment. Have you?
I agree, and I recommend to everybody, and I remembered that story.
Nice.
So
Perfect.
I agree, and I try to do this every day of my life, and I recommend it to everybody, is that do one thing every day that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but like you say, if you do, for 2 minutes, I'm going to do this, or for like I'll turn the water when I take a shower every night to cold, as cold as I possibly can, and stay there for 1.5 to 2 minutes. And there's a lot of theory about cold therapy that it helps. I mean, the science, I think, is still trying to work itself out. But if I take nothing else away from it, it was I did something uncomfortable. And that allows me then to do other things that are uncomfortable. That allows me to go to treatment, and just be beaten up and things like that, and be like, what, I can handle this. I can take this. I can, and my nurses will tell you, nurse asked me when I was in treatment last week, it was, well, when do you start to feel better? I said, usually by Thursday. And she said, oh, Thursday. Okay, so like 4 or 5 days after treatment. I said, yeah, but it doesn't slow me down. And her was like, of course it doesn't. It's you. I mean, it's not gonna slow you down. But for a lot of other people, it's like, I don't feel good. I'm gonna lay around and rest. I'm not. Like I said, I get plenty of rest when I'm dead. So I'm gonna use the uncomfortableness that I learned from taking a cold shower, that I learned from my therapy when my body hurts and my emotions are raw and things like that. I can get through this. So those are, again, do those things. They don't have to be big things. Like, I hate going to the dentist. The other day I picked up the phone and made my 6-month appointment to go have my teeth cleaned. And I'm sure your audience is like, oh, that's not a big deal. When you hate the dentist as much as I do, it is a big deal. So it's little things like that. Find little things throughout your day that you're like, I don't want to do this. This is uncomfortable. It hurts. It's whatever, and do it. So that's that part. Let me just tell you this story real quick to kind of go back to what we were talking about. So when I'm feeling those emotions are raw and I'm down and I'm looking inward. I'm looking at this hurts. Oh, woe is me. This is terrible. And I found a very simple way to get out of that is go find somebody else to talk to. Go find somebody else to help. I'm at the hospital all the time. There's always somebody who's worse off than I am that I can say, hey, how's it going? You look like you're having a tough day. You want to talk or something? Now all of a sudden the focus isn't on me. The focus has now switched to trying to help another individual. And I just find that with my own body, it's like, I don't feel as bad because I'm not focused on how bad I feel. I'm focused on trying to take the pain and the difficulty and the adversity off of another human being. And for me, it just sort of flips the way I feel.
Thank you for sharing that story. And luckily it came back.
Thank God. It's tough being old, let me tell you.
I just published the other week an episode with a former monk. And that was such a fascinating story because one of the snippets he described, he learned as a monk being a monk in India. One of the sort of stupid things we do in the West, and also as psychologists, we try to focus on what makes you feel good. How can you be happy? And so one of the things or the lessons that he actually shared was, funnily enough, happiness comes from not thinking about yourself. So exactly what you just described. When you think about yourself and your misery and the difficulties and don't know how to get out of that and what to do differently, it doesn't really help. But what it does, or what does help, is being in service. They learned every single day in their practice in their monastery how to be of service to someone else. That was the thing they needed to learn and practice. And that is apparently their secret, their key to happiness. So that what you just share, what I guess comes naturally to you or you'll learn it at some point, is a very solid thing that they understand in the East, that it actually comes from being of service to another human being, because then you, as you said perfectly, put the attention away from yourself and the misery that you're in to, hey, there's another person. How can I help that one person? Yeah, so thank you for sharing. That came up to me again, and I felt it might be very useful to share that too.
It is interesting you mentioned that, because I was doing some writing the other day, and I wanted to see. I'm a Christian, so it was like how many times does the word happy or happiness appear in the Bible? 10 times. That's it. So it's like God never said we were supposed to be happy, but the word joy or rejoice or joyful appears 420 times in the Bible. So if you look at that and say, nobody ever said you were going to be happy, but you can be joyful. And I think one of the ways to be joyful is just like that monk. I am of service to another human being. I am of service to something that's bigger than me. And I really think that's what life is all about. I think it goes back to the story that we were talking about with the people who had near-death experiences. How do you treat my people? How do we treat each other? Are we in service to other people? Or so much as we see on the news every day, are we just screaming at each other? And when you're screaming at me and I'm screaming at you, neither one of us can understand what we're talking about. And one of the things that we used when I was a hostage negotiator is what we call tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. In other words, Julian, help me to understand where you're coming from. And the important word there is understand, not agree, just understand. If I was negotiating with you and you just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to tell you that, oh yeah, I totally agree with that. That's something you should have done. But I want to understand where you're coming from, because empathy builds trust, and trust gets me to a point where I can try to get you out safely.
Yeah, and when you look from my angle, when I try to help another person in my sessions, I don't have the answers. That's the thing that a lot of people mistake. I don't know the solution to your problems. But through me trying to understand what's actually going on with you, I think 2 things are happening. One, I open the space for you to actually genuinely share what you feel. I don't judge it. As you said, I might not agree with it, but at least don't judge it. And the other thing that happens is when you can actually freely share what's on your mind and where you're coming from, you actually build or create maybe a different perspective. You can think about it in a different way. And I think that is such a useful thing. And most people and most clients actually just need that, the empathy, the listening, the understanding, or like trying to understand, I guess, just the act of help me understand why you did that. How does this play into this? And what do other people think about that? And then you just get into a really deep conversation, as we talked earlier, just 3 questions, which helps so much another person to look inward, to go deep, and to actually feel good just by being or by feeling heard. And I guess empathy sort of reflects that in a similar way. So I guess.
Do you find that people come to you looking for the answers that you're going to give them, as opposed to you guiding them to come to their own answers?
Yeah, some. Like it's maybe 40 kind of expect or hope an answer from me. 60 by now understand, okay, it's maybe not that I give them the answers, but they have to do the work themselves and understand themselves better. But there's still a percentage that comes there and puts me as the expert. Hey, you know psychology, you know how things work, and please tell me what's wrong with me or what should I do now. And I think that is, I mean, when we are desperate, when we are in doubt, when we have no idea what's going on and how to deal with the situation, I understand. Somebody can please just tell me what to do, or especially when there's a decision to be made. Quite some people want another person to take the sort of burden off their shoulders, and I think that's what sometimes comes in as well. But yeah, so it happens every now and then.
Interesting. I mean, do you try to make this? I guess, how do I say this? I heard a coach once talk about, I don't want to be, up here and the person I'm coaching down here. This has to be an equal relationship. It can't be one's above or one's below. It's an equal relationship. And if it's not, I'm not going to coach that person. So, I mean, do you feel the same way as a psychologist, or is this? I mean, obviously you've studied this, you understand it, you know how things work. You also have a lot of experience in it. Are you looking at this as we're equals talking about an issue that we're gonna work out, or do you feel that, okay, I'm the psychologist, I know what's going on, I'm gonna get you to where you need to be, but the word boss keeps coming to my mind. But are you the? I think you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm not making a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, totally get that. And I would agree with that coach, that when I'm talking to another person that come to me for whatever reason, I like to be and I want to be on the same level, because yes, I might have studied it. I also disagree with quite some psychology study by now, because understanding it's quite often taking the average out of a person, out of a crowd, and out of a maybe specific age group and whatever. So it's the way psychology is being studied is not really reflecting your individual perspective. I might have ideas about patterns that might be unfolding. I might have ideas about what the issue might be underneath the superficial thing that you're bringing up. But I can just offer you perspectives, offer you ideas, offer you new ways of thinking about the thing that you're struggling with, or through my questions explore completely new ways that you haven't discovered yourself before. But I can't know what's right for you. I can offer you this path guiding you in the direction that might be helpful, and I'm fairly confident if you want to change, I can probably guide you there. But I can't do that for you, and I don't know the path for you. So that's this weird, intricate thing that I think I can help you get there, but only if you also want. If a person does not want to be coached or being the psychologist, I can't do it. I can't help that person. And so,
And how many people that you
coach, yeah.
How many people that you talk with do you think actually want to change, actually want to make a difference, actually want to find a solution to what's bothering them versus I'm just going through the motions?
Let me use an arbitrary upper percentage again, just based on my feeling, I think. I think 70 or 80% really want to change, and maybe 90% really come with the logical intent, hey, I want to make a change and actually improve my life. But when it then comes and we go deeper, understand where that fear is actually, where that change is coming from, then there might also be fear connected to that. You might need to let go of old patterns that feel comfortable. You might need to let go of connections or members of your family that might be very close to you. Like all of this change is always connected with, maybe we come back to a little bit what we talked about earlier as well. Like when you change, a version of you needs to die in order for the new to become present or be born, essentially. And so that is very scary, right? When you have to change the way you do things, it also means that something old needs to die or needs to change too. And so I think a lot of people come with the intent, hey, I want to change. I want change. But the question is, do you want to put the effort in to create that change? Is sometimes like a secondary, like silent no, not really. I'm not really fully in to create that. And I think there's also still a little bit my job to make it visible how the change is going to impact you and how your life is going to take a different turn when you make that decision or if you stay in that lane. And I think that without those things, I can definitely help another person, but they still have to put the courage in to go into the unknown, because essentially it's the unknown, because you don't know the future when you make that different step, right? And so thank you for that really awesome and valid question. I think most people want change, but they're scared of actually making that change themselves and putting the effort in. And so I think that also guides me maybe to a question for you now again, is when you think about that, or was it memento mori, when you remember death, and you know you lived with cancer for so long, is it helping you to actually initiate some change for yourself because you see it so vividly and you see how you spend your days?
I think so. I mean, I certainly am not the same person I was 12 years ago. At least I hope I'm not. I mean, that'd been a waste of 12 years if that was the case.
Right. That's also an interesting one. I like the old Stoic.
Say it again.
That's also an interesting perspective to see it and say it. If I'm still the same person as I was 12 years ago, something must have gone wrong, right? So just the basic understanding of actually I continuously change anyways. The question is, how do I want to, and do I want to influence it consciously? I think that's an interesting perspective too.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I love the old Stoic saying that says, no man steps in a river twice because it's not the same river and he's not the same man. And I think that's the case. I think, and this may sound kind of weird to your audience, but I've learned a lot through this cancer journey. But two of the biggest things that I've learned are, number one, I don't think you really know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity in your life. And the second thing, and this is what I think is going to sound weird, is that cancer has made me a better human being. And I've been asked occasionally, if you could go back and live your life and not go through all the pain and difficulty and uncomfortableness that you had with cancer, would you do that? And I don't think I would. I mean, I'm in a wheelchair. I don't have a leg. There's a lot of negative to that, but there's also, if I can be an example of people or two people that say, if he can go through all this and still be positive and still be happy and still find the silver lining of all this, then why can't I do it? I mean, why can't I be an example for other people that when you get cancer, you don't have to be down, you don't have to be depressed, you don't have to, live in this ugliness. You can find, as I said before, meaning in your misery. And when you do that, all of a sudden, then this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is God's way of saying, I'm not going to heal you, but I'm going to use you, your uncomfortableness, your difficulty, your pain, to show a different path to other people.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That, I think what it does, or at least what comes up to me right now, is really this notion of it's not about you. What I had also earlier with the monk, that it's not about you. Don't think about you all the time. Think about how you can impact another person and how you can give something to another person that helps them improve their lives. And it seems like you are doing that by a huge margin, and it's really awesome to spend so much time with you and talk to you so deeply about these topics and subjects. I would love to now imagine a person that is between 25 and 35, a bit struggling with their life, not knowing where their purpose lies, that you might have found already quite clearly, and are doubting their decisions, are doubting which route to take in their journey. What would be the easiest and clearest advice that you could give that person?
That's a great question. I guess I would say this. It's more important who you work with and who you work for than it is the work that you do. Find people in your life that want what's best for you, that are willing to invest in you, that want to see you succeed, and hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountain together. I've seen, there's a writer by the name of Ernest Hemingway, wrote back in the 20s and 30s, but he wrote a book called Farewell to Arms. And it's sort of a semi-autobiographical book about his time as an ambulance driver, even though he was an American citizen, with the Italian army during World War I. And there's a line in that book that I absolutely love. And the line goes like this: life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. So just like if you were to break your arm and a doctor would set it and put it in a cast, when that arm heals at that break, that area will be stronger than the rest of your arm. I think it's a great metaphor for our lives. Life is going to beat you to your knees. It's going to cripple you from time to time. But if you can keep moving forward, and I think you do that by surrounding yourself with good people, with people that are willing to invest in you and want good things for you, and using them, not using them for the sake of using them, but using their assistance, their help to move you in the direction to force you almost to grow, to get better, to face your adversity, face your fears, and see where that takes you in your life. I think fear is probably, and you probably have a better handle on this, fear is one of the biggest things that holds us back from doing everything in our lives.
And the only antidote is really courage. Despite fear, moving through it, rather than wanting the fear to go away, just take the courage to move on despite of it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that is so helpful to look at the people that are actually supporting you, that are wanting the best for you, and that not so much looking at focusing on what job exactly you get, or is that a higher rank, or is this gonna be the best job for the economy in the next 25 years, but rather what are the people that are supporting you, and what connections are really, what's the word, deep, and nurturing, and that you can build this strong alliance with, maybe even, so that you grow with them, that you can support each other and have this journey that of life that apparently breaks everybody, to come back better and stronger and have a good process in resilience. Wow, thank you so much. And then just the last question, what is currently taking up the most space in your mind?
So I'm writing another book.
Hmm.
I wrote a book called Sustainable Excellence, which is a book about success, or what I think, could help people become successful. And ever since I wrote that book, and I wrote it 4 years ago, I've always felt this kind of yearning, this sort of tug to write another book that also is about a word that starts with the letter S, and that word is significance. Success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for other people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you can be both. I think you can be successful and significant in life. But I wanted to write this book about significance. And I have a first draft. I'm kind of, making the first draft a better draft. And then I'm going to send it out to some people that, here, read this, tell me where I'm wrong, or tell me where I need to fill in or make better, or whatever, that I trust. So that's taking a great deal of my time. When I wrote my first book, I was not on all this medication, for my cancer and things like that. So the second book is much harder for me because you kind of get that brain fog with the medication. And, there's those times where, no, that's not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? And it's almost like the more you try to get it, the harder it comes, the more elusive it becomes. And I find it a great way when I get to that point is, okay, stop. Take your hands off the keyboard, close your eyes, and just go to that part where we talked about, just let your mind go where it goes. And eventually things will start popping into your mind. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with this. No, oh, wait a minute, that might work. And that. So the more I force it, it never comes. The more I kind of back off from it and let it just sort of flow, I've learned that through this writing process, that's the only way I'm going to get this book to where I want it to be. And so that was a long answer to when I spend my time.
It's the perfect answer because it actually explains that you think a lot about it. Yeah, no, but it's awesome, the significance. I guess we talked about it quite a bit as well in the end, that to think about not only like how you personally can be successful and make your mark in the world, but actually how you can impact other people in the way that it feels significant to you. And I think that's such a wonderful idea, such a wonderful concept, and I'm glad you're writing a book about it, and looking forward to hearing about it. And for now, Sustainable Excellence is also in the description, so people can check it out and look it up if that is something that resonates with them. And especially now, after hearing you talk so much about inspiration and the being constantly in progress and being in spirit and being a person that really wants to leave the world a better place, and now also encourage people to live uncommon lives, because as we can see with your life, it was such a journey. And I think the concept that you shared of living the life in decades, or thinking about it in decades, and then reaping the benefits when you're in the 50s or 60s, is, I think, such a liberating thing, because we don't have those arbitrary numbers that we try to adhere to, but can rather look in to the future and see, okay, I'm not doing this for me right now to get the status, but actually I'm building something more long-term, bigger than just now for me in the next few months. And I think that's already a great perspective to incorporate. And I also take those 3 questions with me for just getting to know strangers. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Terry. And I hope everybody who's listening to this right now takes a ton of notes. I think there were so many valuable stories and concepts in here. Thank you so much for your time, Terry, and sharing all your life story, your emotions, your way of being. And thank you so much.
Well, Julian, thanks for having me out. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Awesome. You listened to the full episode. Your investment to a more calm, confident, and doubtless self. Now you can make a commitment to yourself and help others discover this podcast. Simply by subscribing and following the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. I hope to see you here soon again for the new episode dropping every other Thursday. Talk soon.